What started as a tropical wave off the coast of Africa became one of the most devastating natural disasters in state history. Hurricane Harvey hit the Texas coast on August 25th, 2017. And the damage remains.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration estimates the total cost from Harvey at $125 billion, the costliest natural disaster in a particularly devastating year that included Hurricanes Maria and Irma. Thousands were evacuated, families were separated, and lives were changed forever.
But what came from the disaster were the stories of recovery, the stories of neighbor helping neighbor, those boat owners navigating the streets of Houston to help those in need, and tourists flocking back to the Texas coast, not only to enjoy time in the sun, but to put money back into the towns that desperately need it.
Tonight, we'll take a look back on not only the path that Harvey took last August, but where it's taken us today. We've each traveled to various parts of the state that were affected. Cities like Houston and Corpus Christi.
Smaller towns like Port Aransas, Rockport, and Refugio. Communities that will forever be connected to Harvey, but from what we've seen, communities that will come out of this stronger.
Mandatory evacuations are underway.
We rarely see anything this big.
The landscape changed forever.
We just saw wind gusts of about 100 miles per hour.
Amid the destruction, the stories of resilience.
Everybody's coming together.
Hurricane Harvey hit right here.
Your Weather Authority team, KSAT 12.
Progress has been slow here, and the scars still clear.
After Harvey, 1 year later.
Here's a look at the Texas counties that were impacted by Hurricane Harvey, and 68 deaths were a direct result of that storm. It's also estimated that Harvey dumped 27 trillion gallons of rain on Texas and Louisiana over a 6-day period. To put it in perspective, that's enough water to fill the Astrodome 85,000 times or supply New York City with water for 5 decades.
It was a different scene in Corpus Christi. The city with a population of more than 300,000 was spared the worst, in this case by a mere 50 miles.
Yeah, but prior to landfall, the situation at times looked dire, and it served as a gathering point for the nation's media, including KSAT's cameras. Now, Justin Horn, who was there, retraces his steps the night of Harvey's landfall.
I would say we're getting some gusts here of at least 60 to maybe 70 miles per hour.
A rapidly intensifying storm, the state and the nation quickly began to pay attention to Harvey. All eyes were on the Texas coast.
Throughout my whole, life in Corpus, they've always gone to Houston or Brownsville.
So this is a different situation.
Yeah, this was like, oh man, it's actually really coming.
And we are here in Corpus, and we've been hunkered down.
Corpus was on edge. As it strengthened almost overnight into a Category 4 storm, we began experiencing its fury that evening.
The night Harvey came ashore, we found refuge in this bank parking garage. It offered us a great view of what was going on outside, and it was also fairly safe. Winds were gusting to about 100 miles per hour. What was interesting about that night was the fact that the winds were blowing left to right down this road here and actually blowing out into the Gulf of Mexico. And that's because of the position of Harvey.
Still, Corpus wouldn't escape damage-free. As Harvey began to pull away that night, we set out in the dark chaos with our biggest asset, KSAT 12's Storm Chaser. That's when we came across widespread damage, including this highway sign completely toppled. Across the street from the parking garage where we broadcasted that night was an abandoned hotel. We watched as the roof was ripped apart. Now that hotel is gone, torn down after taking a beating.
There was literally like no business. Everybody was in recovery mode, so nobody was out like spending and if people did have like extra money, everybody was out helping like neighbors and people in the surrounding towns.
And that was the biggest challenge directly after the storm, says Benjamin Carrizales, owner of Taco Bar food truck. Commerce was brought to a halt. Most convenience stations ran out of gas. Over the last year, Corpus has returned to a sense of normalcy, and business has slowly recovered, including Carrizales', which today is thriving again. But just miles away, the recovery hasn't been so easy. The eye wall of Harvey made a direct hit on the cities of Rockport and Aransas Pass.
The damage significant, with winds sustained at more than 130 miles per hour. The slow recovery has been well documented as residents have been hit with hardship after hardship.
We were there as the sun came up the morning after Harvey, and what we saw looked like a war zone.
That's when it really got real to my daughters, when I text her a picture of my arm saying to call her if they found my body, because they were saying that, for people that chose to stay to do that.
Beverly Newton was the first person we met as we drove into Rockport that morning. She stopped us to ask if we could call her daughter.
Was trying to find anybody with a telephone to get word to her.
We did, only able to get a phone call out several hours later. She had survived.
We chose to stay here, voluntarily chose to stay here.
Newton was one of several residents who opted to ride out the storm. The tales from that night, harrowing.
It was a lot of noises, a lot of scary noises.
I watched his roof behind me fly off.
Tinker Poole was another who stayed behind, and it's something she says won't happen a second time.
Because I'm not staying again.
You're not staying again?
No, I won't stay again.
In the KSAT 12 Storm Chaser, we had attempted to get to Rockport from Corpus the night of the storm, only to find power lines blocking every path in. We made it in the next morning, and the scene was reminiscent of a war zone. Buildings leveled, the smell of natural gas filled the air.
Knowing that they were paid off, now I have nothing. You know, you never know.
Graciela Romero, a lifelong Rockport resident and owner of several trailer homes, lost everything she'd worked for. It's a theme that even a year later is still present.
You'd think toilet paper wouldn't be a must, but it is. You know, some people are too busy paying their light bill or their roofs, $5,000, $6,000, septic tanks.
A lot of people are still in tents. A lot of people are still living in one-room shacks. Numerous families are living in one place.
One thing's for sure, progress has been slow here, especially when it comes to getting money to make needed repairs. But most people tell us they're willing to be patient and they have no plans to leave.
People do have to be patient. It's not going to happen overnight.
Amazingly, through all of the hardships, there's a positive vibe here.
We didn't give up. We didn't give up, and we're not giving up.
Romero has managed to construct a few tiny homes with the help of donations to replace the trailer homes she lost, providing affordable housing for those without a place to live. And Newton, who owns a business herself, sees light at the end of the tunnel.
When you own small businesses, you have to recover slowly.
And you guys aren't leaving then?
Oh, no, we're not leaving.
And neither is Rockport's spirit.
One of the big questions we received after Harvey was, how did it impact marine life, especially when it came to our coastal communities that rely on fishing as a big part of their economy?
We spoke to some researchers who say Harvey actually provided some unique opportunities, but it did come at a cost.
There's more than just research going on at the Marine Science Institute on Port Aransas.
We received a direct hit from Harvey.
The Institute is part of the University of Texas at Austin, and repairs are still going on 1 year later.
For example, you might hear some of the ambient noise, and they're repairing one of our roofs.
The old roof was made of pebbles, which became little projectiles as they were launched at windows during the storm. A pier was snapped in half, labs were flooded, samples were lost, and expensive instruments were damaged.
We had one piece of equipment that was over $1 million, and it was one of 25 in the world.
The estimated total cost and damages? About $45 million. Brad Arisman has been working with the Institute for the past 4 years. He and his students' research is focused on fish.
Sea trout, red drum, all the fish that we like to catch. Understanding when and where and how many fish are spawning is absolutely critical information for monitoring their fish populations and managing the fishery.
The researchers use a wide variety of high-tech instrumentation, including this, basically a high-tech underwater microphone. And 5 of these were left in the water when Harvey hit. Listen to what they picked up.
That's the sweet sound of sea trout. Their mating sounds, to be more specific. Here's an isolated clip. The fact that this is happening while a major hurricane is passing overhead led to calling the sea trout Texas strong.
The timing of this spawning is the evening. And that's exactly when the eye of the hurricane passed over and did. So basically, while we were completely annihilated, as a community, or reshaped and restructured, these fish are well adapted.
When fishermen finally returned to the water after Harvey, the response piqued interest.
And I can tell you this spring, all the way through the summer, it's been one of the best trout years we've seen. I can't explain, I can only speculate as to why. I mean, this community, these areas, the economy, the livelihoods, and the recreation, everyone depends and thrives on fisheries around here. So we need to maintain the productive fisheries that we have.
The fish have adapted to hurricanes, and the Institute plans to do so as well.
We're taking lessons learned from the storm and taking that opportunity to make our facilities better, stronger, and harder.
Our Hurricane Harvey special continues with a stop in Dickinson over near Houston, where 90% of that small town was underwater.
Yeah, I talked to a woman who had to escape the rising waters by going up to her attic, and another woman who opened her home to those who needed help.
It reinforced that what you need people.
And I traveled to Port Aransas, where Hurricane Harvey caused millions of dollars in damage, and how one resort took some innovative steps to welcome tourists back to the Texas coast. You know, some of the most heartwarming stories that came out of that whole Hurricane Harvey were those of neighbor helping neighbor. You remember the folks that just had a boat, put it in the water, and went and rescued folks. Well, even a year later, something similar is going on. Now, it doesn't have to do with boats and rescuing somebody out of the water, but Port Aransas was hit very, very hard, and they're being helped out by us, their neighbors, just by going down there.
It was dark and it was loud, and you could hear the twisted metal, and you know, we'd lost all communications, and that part was a little nerve-wracking.
It was so devastating, so not real.
Driving up Mustang Island, there's not much evidence that this barrier island came about as close to suffering a direct hit from Hurricane Harvey as you can get. Now, there are still some grass and weaves tightly woven around some of the fences, and some of the posts are anything but vertical. Now, from a distance, a lot of the high-rise condominium buildings appear to be okay. But up close, the damage, like here at the Port Royal, even a year later, is almost unbelievable.
It's been a journey to get to this point. Significant damage, but we've worked hard to come back and be a place that families can enjoy together and make memories.
Most of the residences are habitable, and the pool is as sparkling and refreshing as ever. As for the necessities that keep a building like this running, food trucks have replaced the restaurant. A tent houses the lobby, and there is a top-of-the-line air-conditioned porta potty. The gutted first floor is now an open-air rec room.
This was our hub, and it's certainly been tough to lose it, but we've worked hard to replicate as much of that as we can. We've got this plaza area here that's turned into a nice escape from the heat, some fun family games.
Well, of course, the Port Royal sits right on the beach along the Gulf, and so there was nothing between it and Hurricane Harvey. However, most of the damage came from the west. That's because as the storm moved up the coast and made landfall just north of here, around that counterclockwise rotation, the Port Royal was hit by the backside of the storm, and everything came in from the bay and hit it this direction. Further up the road, as you get into the heart of Port Aransas, most everything appears to be normal. Traffic was steady to at times heavy on this Wednesday in mid-July when we visited. Plenty of folks were enjoying the sand and surf and soaking up the South Texas sun. However, it's a good bet that many of these tourists are just here for the day. That's because a lot of the places that are normally available for a night or two or even a longer stay, well, they didn't fare as well as the Port Royal. Even a year later, some are just now getting cleaned out, while others are ghostly gutted shells. Of course, while these condos and hotels are uninhabitable, they're not bringing in any money. And not only does that hit the owners in the wallet, but it also has an effect on the rest of this tourist town.
Most of the people that came here this year really came to support us. They knew that we're not going to be 100%, but they came, even if they didn't find a place to stay, they came for one day. That's for sure. They did it just to come and support us. Because if they wouldn't come, it would be worse than what it is now. The roof was gone, the window were gone, the water was like 2-3 feet high.
Inside, everything is pretty much the way it was prior to that fateful weekend in August last year. But just across the street, this business, like still many others, hasn't reopened its doors yet. And then down the street, it's been more than 52 Sundays since the congregation was able to fill the pews of this church. Rough estimates are that the community is about 75% of what it was pre-Harvey. Joseph Avalos, who is with AT&T, was one of the first to see the aftermath when Harvey finally headed north.
Seeing it now, I can't believe it's up and running the way it is now. From what I saw last year, what we, what was around us. There was nowhere to eat, nowhere to sleep, nowhere to, we ate MREs. It was just it was an experience.
Like many of us, he and his family are regulars here, making the 2.5-hour trek down I-37 a couple of times a year and spending a couple of nights or more. However, this trip, there wasn't any place to stay, so they're just across the bridge in Corpus Christi. Even so, they felt an obligation to come here, just for the day.
We love the area. You know, I know they're doing the best they can to make things work, so, you know, still supporting them. And God bless them for what they've done so far.
And it's these folks that the merchants are counting on to carry them through the tough times.
You can still come, still have a good time. Nothing else has changed. The beach is still the beach. The shop's still here. The locals are still here. We got to support them. We're supporting local Texans. That's what it's all about.
The hope is, by the second anniversary of Harvey, it will just be a bad memory and not a way of life.
This field is the heart of the community in Refugio. Coming up on our special, After Harvey 1 year later, we'll introduce you to the football team that banded together in the recovery effort.
And it's a historic waterway designed to withstand flooding. But even Buffalo Bayou was no match for the wrath of Hurricane Harvey. I'll put it all in perspective as our Hurricane Harvey 1 year later continues. Now, we've been saying this all along, San Antonio really dodged a bullet when it comes to rainfall totals.
Yeah, there was a huge gradient across the area, a big time amount of rain off to the east around Houston, but off to the west, places like Del Rio, only about half an inch. In San Antonio, we got about 2 inches.
Yeah, and even in Seguin, just 30 miles to the east of San Antonio, about 10 inches of rainfall. Further to Houston, 40 plus inches of rain. So Justin and I want to help put this in perspective for you.
Yeah, I'm 6'4", so after the rain fell in San Antonio, it would only be up to about my feet or so. Not very high, but in Houston, a different story.
Yeah, totally different story. I'm 5'2", and if I was standing in Houston, it would come up to my shoulder or even higher. And that's exactly what happened at Buffalo Bayou. Now, right beside me is the bayou, and behind me is downtown Houston. And if I was standing here a year ago, I'd be under nearly 40 feet of water. Buffalo Bayou stretches 10 miles to the port of Houston. The park was finished in 2015 and is designed to flood, but conditions around the time the storm hit made it hard to serve its purpose.
We had 3 monumental floodings. What was different about Harvey was the amount and continuancy of the release of water.
Not only did the bayou take on Harvey's rainfall, but floodwaters collected west of the bayou near Katy.
For 6 weeks, so nonstop, water was being released and really made an impact on some of the trails.
I'm walking alongside a busy Allen Parkway, which is nearly a football field away from the bayou itself. But still, businesses and residential areas were affected by the floodwaters, including what used to be a TV station, now an abandoned lot. It would be a week until park goers could walk along the street level, and the Buffalo Bayou Partnership, the organization who cares for the park, could begin to clean up.
The biggest challenge that we had was all of the sediment. When we got our equipment out, to be able to doze along the trails, it was like kind of the snow drifts.
It would not be until February when the park was looking like itself again. And as it's been with most stories after Hurricane Harvey, it was the people in the community that made it happen.
We had about 2,400 volunteers, which contributed about 7,000 hours. I do have chills talking about it, but it really was so encouraging. We were so overwhelmed with the number of volunteers who came out.
Well, as you just saw, Houston and San Antonio are separated by about 200 miles, but the changes in elevation and landscape over those miles is vast.
And our Katie Blake did some research. She found out just how much of a difference topography makes, especially when we're talking about 40 to 60 inches of rain.
Wow.
There are 22 different watersheds that make up the landscape of the Houston area. This includes creeks, bayous, reservoirs, and one major river. Now, when even one of these watersheds floods, it can cause destruction. But when all 22 are out of their banks, well, that's what happened during Hurricane Harvey.
We've never faced a situation before we had every single one of our 22 watersheds flooding, and I'm talking major record flooding.
Jeff Lindner of the Harris County Flood Control District is a meteorologist and hydrologist, so he's seen what water can do. Harvey, however, was a different beast.
I mean, this was really, and I can't say this enough, an unprecedented storm.
If you're unfamiliar with how Houston and Harris County is laid out, the biggest thing to know is it's flat.
We have a very urban area, pretty much that has been built over the top of a marsh. And what I mean by marsh is it's not really any different here than, say, southern Louisiana. It's very low-lying, it's very coastal.
This is Harris County. It's home to about 4.65 million people, according to harriscountytx.gov, as well as those 22 watersheds. Now, each of these polygons represents a watershed like the Buffalo Bayou, the San Jacinto River, and the Addicks Reservoir. Now, having 22 watersheds in one county is a lot. In comparison, Dallas County has 9, Travis County has 7, and Bexar County, we only have 5 watersheds. And the biggest issue with having that many watersheds is that they all have to drain to the same place. In the case of Harris County, it's Galveston Bay. And as you can imagine, that can create quite a backlog when rain starts falling across the whole county.
As Harvey stalled over southeast Texas Saturday night and Sunday morning, almost every creek, bayou, and other watershed was filling up fast.
I mean, water was everywhere. So by Sunday midday, about 75% of our county was underwater. That had water above the ground. And in the end, we had 154,000 homes flood. That's just homes.
So, yes, the topography of Harris County did play a role in just how bad Harvey was for the Houston area. However, Jeff says too much rain is just that. Too much rain.
So it's more so the topography, the flat topography we have, but even more important is the rainfall rate. How fast the rain falls from the sky. If you get 30 inches of rain over 5 or 6 days, your systems can sort of keep up with that. But when you get 25, 30 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, there's just no way your drainage systems are going to be able to keep up with that.
Maybe for some in the Houston area, Harvey was always going to be Harvey. It was always going to be devastating. But that doesn't mean they won't be ready next time.
I would probably say that the residents of Southeast Texas, especially Harris County and Houston, know the most about their hydrology than any place in the nation right now because of Harvey. Because it forced people to learn, what watershed do I live in? Where does my water come from? What elevation am I at?
One thing that was never in doubt, when to start rebuilding.
What I always tell people, things are a little bit different in Texas. We're not going to sit here and not do something. We kind of have this mentality, and I know you'll see it down in Rockport and Port Aransas, and any of the places you go, of people, they start immediately. People around here, we start immediately. As soon as the wind stops, as soon as the rain stops, as soon as the water starts going down, we're out there helping each other recover, and that's something really special that we have.
One family who was greatly impacted by the controlled releases we just talked about, the Trammels. This is what their home looked like last August, debris covering their entire front yard. The photo, a powerful representation of what many families were forced to face. But the Trammels turned that devastation into determination to find the positivity in so much loss.
Hillary Trammell and her husband were out of the country when the storm hit. Their home didn't flood until after Harvey, when water was released from the Addicks Reservoir.
So the kids did what they could, and they raised the furniture and they put things on top of tables. Never expected anything like this.
It wasn't until Hillary's son sent her a picture of the family's truck covered in water that they realized the extent of the flooding.
We sat and we just said, we flooded, it's done. We couldn't stop it. It was happening no matter what. We went through the house mentally and cried, and just kind of wept for the things that were gone. And they said, all right, that's that. Here we go.
When they got home a week later, water was still chest high. They had to be taken to their house on a boat. The Trammels assessed the damage, and they tried to save as much as they could.
This was my grandparents' trunk that they came to America in 1915. So my mother-in-law passed away, I think 5 years ago. She had made this for my husband. Little things like our coats. Well, I could clean those, right?
The recovery process has tested many of the family's neighbors.
Because people that I thought would really have the fortitude to make it through and be like, yeah, I could do it, I saw weeping, and I saw them hurting in a way that I knew they needed somebody to just steady them.
Some have left the neighborhood, and there have been times the Trammels have questioned whether or not they could continue.
And so I put our song on, and I grabbed him close and made him dance with me, and I said, this is what makes it a home.
And there are still some wounds that haven't healed.
Things that I haven't been able to do emotionally, I guess at this point, I haven't been able to think about getting another piano. On my 16th birthday, I had a choice, a car or piano. I picked a piano. And on my 40th birthday, my husband bought the baby grand. Both pianos went under.
The couple has also had to consider pushing back retirement.
I'm 53. We had no debt. Our cars were paid off. We were about a year and a half from paying the house off to having a huge loan to fix the house, new cars, right? And so we're like, all right, well, we're gonna work probably another 10 years.
But Hillary says she tries to keep their challenges in perspective.
For me, in the midst of your worst day is somebody else's best day.
And she's been inspired by the way family, friends, and neighbors have stepped up to offer support.
It was the most humbling experience in my life because I'd never been one to ask for help. I'd always been the one giving the help. And we had people from all over the world come into our home. And even my husband, he said, you know, when people said, I'm praying for you, he said, I never felt the power of prayer like I did during that. This storm turned us from a neighborhood into a community.
She keeps this sign around as a reminder of the kindness and the good she's witnessed firsthand.
We have an opportunity every day of our life to be the good for someone else. You know, you can look for all the bad or you can look for all the good. So even in the worst of times, there's good, and I think this hurricane's been living proof.
And she is looking at the loss as a way to create a new story for her family, a story she wants everyone who has helped rebuild to be a part of.
In the midst of all of this, behind every sheetrock, all the workers, I'd hand them markers and say, write something. You know, so a lot of people wrote scripture, some people would just sign their name. I said, tell me where you're from, so they'd write their city and state. The theory is, God forbid if we ever flood again, as soon as the walls come down, we are reminded we're not alone.
Harvey's destruction affected many of us in different ways, including basic needs like health care. I'll take you to Southeast Houston, where people are struggling to get the medical attention they need.
And a look at the rebuilding efforts still going on in the small town of Refugio 1 year after Harvey, and how the high school football team became their glimmer of hope. Challenges in Refugio County still remain 1 year after Harvey. The county is about 20 miles northwest of Rockport. People there had little time to evacuate, with Harvey rapidly intensifying into a Category 4 hurricane. The county, estimating 300 homes, are still in need of some sort of repair, but people rebuilding their homes aren't doing it alone, especially in the small town of Refugio, where they've turned to football for hope.
Refugio strong? Yes.
Small words with a big message.
I wear it faithfully. I'm proud of where I'm from.
Lavina Williams and her family have come a long way since Hurricane Harvey hit 1 year ago. Water surrounded her home and a tree was ripped out of the ground.
I couldn't freak out because I had my youngest son with me, but I had never been in a hurricane before.
Two of Lavina's other children were riding out the storm with their friends, including Lavina's oldest son, Armani, who plays defensive tackle for the high school football team.
We didn't think it was going to hit as hard as it hit. The house was rocking, you can hear the wind and stuff, and trees breaking on the top of the roof and everything.
Armani was at the home of his teammate, Caleb Wright. Caleb says 5 people are in this picture. There were actually 19 people staying inside after family members took shelter at the home.
We had to move into the hallway, and the hallway's like this big. It was small.
We gathered around and we started reading the Bible and praying and stuff.
Teammate Trevor Ross was also there. After enduring the rain and wind, athletics seemed to provide some relief amidst the destruction that surrounded the town.
To be honest, football got my mind off of it. It was just, yeah.
The community of Refugio also looked to the football team for comfort.
Whenever the hurricane hit, everybody kept asking if we were still going to have a season and stuff.
The team was able to make it to the state championship, and many in the community made the trip to Dallas to support the Bobcats.
I mean, we really wanted to go out and win, but we gave it all we got, and it was beautiful to see how much people came out and supported us.
The football players didn't just put in their hard work here on the field, they took their grit off the gridiron and into the community.
If people needed help picking up after their house, or tearing down their house, or putting tarp on their roofs, we went out and helped. There wasn't no question about it.
Varsity, we've done our work, our special teams, we don't have to live today.
Coach Herring also helped organize donations for those in need, and the team used their muscle to unload over a dozen trucks of supplies into their field house.
There was people getting canned foods and mattresses and sheets and all that.
The boys went through a lot last year, And for them to come out the way that they did, I think it's pretty amazing.
Lavina was able to move her family into a new home, and there are signs of progress in Refugio. Some homes have sturdy metal roofs, others are nearing the completion of the rebuilding phase, but there are still some neighborhoods dotted with blue tarps. The high school also has some signs of damage that must still be repaired, but the community is determined to be Refugio strong.
They're a family. They're brothers.
Harvey brought out the best in people during, of course, one of the worst of times. Now, we've talked about neighbors helping neighbors, people using their personal boats to rescue those in high water, and people opening their homes to those who had nowhere else to go. Sarah Spivey has the story of one woman and how her kindness brought a community closer.
This is a photo of a flooded street in Dickinson, Texas, which is just to the southeast of Houston, a year ago during Hurricane Harvey. This is the same street which is now a clear pathway to the home of Sandy McDermott, whose home became a safe haven for a group of people during Hurricane Harvey.
Water came to here, right to here.
Sandy McDermott's home was spared in Hurricane Harvey's devastating waters by less than 10 feet. Her town of Dickinson took on more than 50 inches of water after Harvey stalled out in southeast Texas.
90% of Dickinson flooded. 90%. So you think how small a group I'm in. It could have been me just as well as it could have been anyone else. I mean, it really could have been me.
But the fact that her home was spared became more of a blessing to others than it was for Sandy.
How long were you?
Captive?
Yeah, how long were you trapped here?
Oh, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 days.
The moment floodwaters receded was the moment she opened her doors. She hosted roughly half a dozen people at any given time in the nearly 8 months after Harvey. Spare rooms became homes, the living room a place for fellowship.
Well, you got used to each other. The first 2 or 3 weeks, everybody's on their good behavior and not thinking about this or that. But after about 2 or 3 weeks, we were all in our jammies by nightfall. You know, watching TV, and the Astros, you know, it was a big time with the Astros.
Among those who called Sandy's house a home, Linda Butler. She lives near Dickinson Bayou, on family land that belonged to her late husband. When her son moved into the main home, she moved into the cottage home behind it.
I didn't get the 4 feet.
Okay.
I got like the 16 inches.
Yeah.
So I got enough that you tear out the walls, you tear out the floor, you tear out the cabinets, and you move out. I was out for 9 months, and I'm one of the lucky ones.
She stayed with Sandy off and on until the end of May, 9 months after the flood.
During the storm, she was just phenomenal. She took people in, she washed clothes and washed clothes.
Then there's Jenny and Bob Barber.
We had 40 inches. I measured at the bottom of the steps.
Bob had gone to bed early after the rain had started. But it didn't take long for Jenny to wake him back up when the waters rose. He shut off the electricity and they stayed upstairs for 2.5 days before help arrived.
The boat parked or pulled up in the front of the house, front of the front doorway.
Yeah.
And we didn't swim to the boat, but it was
the water was hitting me here.
And fortunately, you know, it's a flat bottom boat, and they had a ladder.
And we just crawled in.
Climb
yes.
in.
The Barbers rebuilt, but Barbara Markey did not.
I sold my house because I didn't think that I wanted to repeat that experience again.
Her home took on nearly 55 inches of rainwater.
What's funny about water, a lot of people think of it as being a way to get clean, but actually water can be just totally the other way. Filthy, dirty, stinking, full of sewage. You could smell the diesel.
When water came in her home, she escaped to the attic where she would spend the night. It wasn't until lunchtime the next day that a boat would come to rescue her.
And when I got down out of the attic, the water was right here. It hit me on my chin.
When asked what she felt when she was rescued, she says nothing.
I didn't feel because I was numb.
Right.
You know, there is no feeling.
Sure, it was shocking.
Well, it was because I looked and saw everything that I owned gone.
We're in Barbara's old neighborhood, and it takes no time at all to realize that this community is still struggling. I mean, we've got people still living in trailers, tons of debris, and even dumpsters in front yards. Rebuilding has been tough and emotionally demanding.
I am not sleeping. I still haven't gotten back to my good 8 hours of sleep. And the other thing that I notice is I'm always on the verge of tears. And I was not one of the unfortunate people. I didn't lose everything.
And new houses don't quite feel like homes.
I feel like I'm visiting, but as I am able to unpack some of the dishes and pots and pans that were saved, then I see things that are familiar. Maybe one day I'll feel like it's home.
But for a few, like Sharon Mitchner, they've somehow found a way to laugh.
Have some interesting pictures. In fact, there was one of him that became real interesting because he was messing around with fishing pole in the living room while we were pumping the water out.
And for her, 1 year later, she focuses on perspective.
And there's people all over this world that are in worse shape than we are. I still have a roof over my head. I may have concrete on the floor, but I've got a roof over my head and I'm safe and I'm dry.
These steel magnolias say they would not be here today without the community that banded together after the storm.
I couldn't have done it without my friends and my family.
That was the blessing of this flood, in the fact that so many people showed good and so many people were there to help. And I think that that's the star.
Sandy doesn't question whether she'd do it all over. So do you feel like because, you were so lucky, that's what helped you to really open up your house to others too, as you realized?
No, I'd have done it anyway.
Still ahead on After Harvey 1 year later. Another Houston area neighborhood that experienced unexpected flooding.
We've never had a flood to where all of this was underwater.
The story of one family living along the Brazos River, forced to leave their home with little warning.
During and in the days after Harvey, the immediate Houston area had its own set of issues. But in some smaller communities outside of downtown Houston, they were dealing with river flooding. Behind me, you see a very nice area, a park. We've got a pretty gazebo and even a cemetery. And even further back than that, there were some homes and communities. Water was all the way up to that roadway and that yield sign you see right there. And it was all underwater because of the river flooding due to Hurricane Harvey. Tiffany Coteras has lived in Richmond, Texas on the Brazos River for most of her life. But now, when it rains, she says it gives her family anxiety.
Anytime we see a storm or anytime we see it's going to be raining for a few days, it's a nonstop, is it going to happen again? Is it, should we start preparing now? It's something you don't just kind of brush off anymore.
That's because for the past few years, they've experienced more flooding than usual.
We've never had a flood to where all of this was underwater.
It started 3 years ago.
2015 was the first experience with the river overflowing and coming into our yard. And then 2016, it actually came into the house. We started rebuilding. We didn't even get to finish completely rebuilding. And when Hurricane Harvey hit in 2017, when it took the house again.
During Harvey, Tiffany was able to prepare better than the previous year. But the weeks and months that followed the storm were still difficult. The family of 7 forced to separate, temporarily living at the homes of different friends and family members.
It definitely does put a major strain on the family. I know with us, there was a lot of times where it's just are we gonna ever make it together?
They weren't able to get back into the home to assess the damage for about 2 weeks. Among the things destroyed, the family's garden they had planted earlier in the year.
The kids were out there every single day helping with it. She was 8 years old at the time. Daughter, she would go out there and she had her watermelons growing.
It wasn't until November that they could start to rebuild.
Everything had to be ripped out, and from the floors to the walls to everything in the kitchen.
Her husband decided to take measures to prepare for the next flooding.
He came up with a different idea to basically, flood-proof our house. So which is why you'll have the metal paneling along the walls. And of course, it was a slow process because financially it was us doing it on our own.
Something that made it easier? The support of neighbors.
Most of the people didn't really know one another. Everybody, they all live busy lives, they all live separate lives. But it was amazing how many people were able to just say, hey, I'm here to help.
Even though it took a while to start on the repairs, the family was able to be back under the same roof for an important day.
And he finally got it enough to where we could come home for Christmas, because that was like his main thing. He's like, I want our family home for Christmas. So, I mean, it wasn't like perfect, but it was to where we could actually stay here for a little bit.
Some of their neighbors have packed their bags and moved away from the Brazos River, but the Gutierrez family says that's something they don't want to do.
I literally grew up in this neighborhood. Same time, it's hard because, once again, you're dealing with the flood, but it's like, how do you just leave?
But for now, they'll continue rebuilding. The garden is now thriving, with the watermelon vines taking over the backyard. But a lot of work still remains.
You get so frustrated at times because you can't find stuff. You still got stuff in boxes. There's still stuff in storage. And it's like you want it to be over and done, but at the same time, it's just kind of like, well, do we even want to finish it yet? Or do we want to just kind of wait and see what's going to happen? Because it's become a yearly tradition. So it's definitely frustrating.
As Texans, a lot of times we have family all across the state. I'm from the Houston area, and Sarah is from here in San Antonio, but she has family in the Galveston area, and her dad works in East Houston. In fact, his doctor's office took on 4 feet of water and caused more than $1 million in damage, a common problem for medical facilities in the Houston area.
My desk was at the far end of the room, but when I came in, it was in pieces all over the room. So water had floated everything around.
A year ago, my dad's clinic was one of the many businesses taking on the trillions of gallons of water that Harvey left in its wake. Offices were left in ruin and heirlooms were lost, including some of my own family memories.
A lot of my pictures of you are gone, pictures that I had.
Oh my gosh, Dad, and that's that thing that my sister made you, Kaylee
yep,
made you.
That was totally destroyed.
A guitar.
These are my diplomas, and this particular one, the one from my nursing degree, got totally damaged, but I was able to rescue this one and the top one, which was my bachelor's, but my degree for my nurse practitioner got totally destroyed and I couldn't save it, and I had to go reapply, pay to get one.
It took 6 months to rebuild the clinic, and it became clear that even a year later, many locals are struggling to find the medical attention that they need.
Currently, the main hospital that was here was shut down and will not reopen. Another of the clinics that was here in the area has shut down and will not reopen. We're one of the only clinics that came back.
And it's through this neighborhood doctor's office that the determination to rebuild remains strong.
The great thing about it was everybody pitching in, finding together, working together, trying to make these things happen, because when we came back, people had been without, who are our patients, had been without care.
As meteorologists, we all experienced the storm in a different way. And coming up, we're going to look back at Harvey's impact and what we've learned after Harvey 1 year later continues.
Welcome back to our coverage after Harvey 1 year later. We have the whole weather team here together. We all covered this storm before, during, and after. So we just want to go out and talk about our experiences and even some things that we've learned since then. Now, Justin, you were literally in the middle of the storm. So let's start with you.
It was incredible. I mean, it's unlike anything I've ever experienced. When you have wind gusts up to 100 miles per hour and just wind-driven rain, and how fast it intensified. I think that was one of the things that was so impressive about Harvey. It became a Category 4 storm almost overnight.
And I thought it was so interesting how we had the comparison of the amount of rainfall over a short distance there. And of course, Houston can't handle the rainfall like an area San Antonio could, in terms of geography and topography.
There were places in Houston, like Dickinson, where those women were from that I showed earlier, that received 56 plus inches of rain. And we drove through the neighborhood and saw it. It is low lying. But the thing that's amazing to me is what the women really said. They said, we don't need all this stuff. We really only need each other.
It made me think, do I really need that much?
Right.
Who needs something that I've got that's really good that I don't really need? So I started really cleaning out.
And Mike, speaking of resiliency, you went to Port A.
Yeah.
Tell us about your trip 1 year later.
They say it's about 75%, it's just heartbreaking, And again, I'm just a tourist that goes down there occasionally, but seeing these places that are just, as I put it in my story, ghostly shells down there. And some folks obviously can rebuild, and other folks, who knows,
Some may never. You'll see
going to
skeletons of buildings for years to come.
In the weeks and months after, and especially now looking back a year later, I think we all learned so much about forecasting. There were so many takeaways from a storm of this magnitude, and especially when it came to doing our rainfall predictions for San Antonio. Earlier in the week, it was looking really bad.
Yeah. A lot of people were thinking it was going to be repeats of a lot of folks remember the flood of '98 and flood of 2002, you know, when we got 1.5 feet of rain approximately at times. And then, you know, you're talking about the rain gradient, nothing
huge.
to 5 feet.
It'll be a case study for sure. I think it's just something we'll go back and look at and study.
And the highest rainfall estimates, because, you know, rain gauges, they're sparsely populated in the areas, but where the really tightest gradient was, I believe it was Refugio County, and that was a 60-inch radar estimate of rainfall.
Incredible.
So the single most impacting rain event from a tropical system since records have been kept in the late 1800s. Now, one thing that I wanted to look at after the hurricane was more so what kind of positives could come out of it. Obviously the camaraderie and people realizing, okay, this is just stuff. We have each other. But actual scientific evidence, you know, studies, research, and not just weather research, but how did this affect our ecosystem? How did it affect fishing? Big industry down there, you know, along the shoreline. And so we actually contacted some scientists, as you saw earlier, but outside of UT's Marine Science Institute, we went to Corpus Christi. And that's where they have the Texas A&M Marine, you know, aquatic research area, basically. And it's very fascinating. They've been doing research since the 1980s on the dwarf sea clams and their survival in San Antonio Bay in particular. Now you may think, okay, big deal. That's the main food source for all the sport fish, all the drumfish. And they've had plenty of opportunities to research drought years, but never a big surplus because that's an estuary. So the salinity changes. How does that affect marine life and the ecosystem? So as the storm surge came into San Antonio Bay, it turned the bay into an ocean, and then the floodwaters came in and turned it into a lake in terms of saltwater and salinity, all within a week.
Wow.
And so I was interested, what does that do? What kind of impact does that have?
But what we're seeing right now is people are reporting very high catches of various fish, and I think one of the reasons is these small organisms that live in the mud are the things the redfish, the trout, the flounder feed on. And so as these forage for these fish, these populations boom. There's more food around for the fish to eat. And so that they're starting to come back real strong as well.
We all dug in very deep. We got many different stories, got into the neighborhoods, the people, but I feel like there's still more stories to be told with such a big catastrophic event. One cool thing is that the people are so Texas strong, even marine life has been proven to be Texas strong. On behalf of everybody who worked on this project and all of you, good work, and thank you for joining us after Harvey 1 year later.